Welcome to Classes in Session, presented by UI Health. I'm Doug Glanville. Sports have evolved over time, and in 2023, baseball is implementing a new set of rule changes. Those who cover these sports must evolve too, or be swallowed up by the dynamic and ever-changing landscape of new talent. Reporters still have their title, but it is the growth and cementing of insiders that have anchored the media future. Those with access, those who are adept at navigating the boundaries of professionalism and social acumen. They are everywhere you want to know about, in locker rooms, on the field when the champagne is pouring. They seem to be awake at all hours, delivering stories while we sleep at night, on call for the next story, always sending us in a frenzy when they break news. They are must-see, must-read, the insiders who cover our favorite sports. We dive into their world of deadlines and fresh content through the pressures of constantly having to unearth the next story. Today, we are fortunate to have two of the best in baseball who cover the game to help us understand more. Buster Olney, senior writer and reporter for Sunday Night Baseball at ESPN, brings decades of news breaking across all media. And Britt Ghiroli, senior national Major League Baseball writer at The Athletic, with vast experience as a beat writer, Washington Nationals, and many other teams in the past. Let's get to class. In the sports world, when you are on the inside, you have access. If you're the one putting on the uniform, there's an understanding that what happens in that locker room stays in that locker room. Yet there's also an expectation that there's someone communicating to the outside world in order to translate that insider culture. They show us what is happening within as close to real time as possible. At the highest levels of professional sports, this reach inside is a requirement. The business of sport is bolstered by the value of access. Rights holders and licensees, advertisers and YouTubers, everyone is seeking a peek. And the more inaccessible the information is to the public, the more value in sharing it. In turn, insider is now a job description. An extension of a reporter, insiders not only are skilled at clubhouse camouflage, but with time they can gain a type of honorary membership for their service. It leads to a golden Rolodex full of key people who are willing to grant direct communication as interpreters and feeders to the story. The fragile balance between what information is meant for public consumption and what is meant for context is constantly recalibrating and adjusting to the whims of the media market. Those scales are weighed down by interpretation of ethics, codes, demands, shifting social media etiquette. Fragile trust glues it all together, where a reporter can command a news cycle with a tap of an icon, valiantly trying to avoid the mistake of becoming the story by simply breaking the story. The blurred lines are part of what shifts the job from reporter to insider. It is about getting on the inside and staying there, but quiet enough to be an observer who is not directly interfering with the experiment, being more Jane Goodall than Elon Musk. It all relies on cachet. The value of it supersedes the rules of the past. The story is no longer compromised by the negotiations with a source over an exchange of information. In fact, having a high-level source who is willing to go to you directly only adds to your credibility. We find similarity to the British royal family, who have spoken about it more and more. There is a contract, unsigned but enforced, that says if you promote the occasional strategic message, we let you know what happens in our private lives. We crack the door open for you. The insiders must navigate competitive waters where the moment you draw a line, someone else may be crossing it. It is a world full of agendas, and as my mom loved to say, if you don't have an agenda, you are on someone else's. Perhaps it's the agent that wants to get his client more money, or the team who wants to frame a disgruntled player, or a personal vendetta, or the staged charitable act, or leverage for NIL. All have motivation to use your goodwill. Caught on the inside are the vast industry stalwarts, many of whom started their profession with a different set of rules. How do they decide what lines to draw, and how do they push back from being a tool of someone or something else? Let's look into the world of an insider from the inside. Joining us in class now is my colleague and friend, Buster Olney, who's a senior writer for ESPN, but also a reporter for Sunday Night Baseball. And we spent many years learning the craft together. And Buster, today we're talking about insider culture around reporting. And I'm curious to get your take on even the definition of insider from all your experience.
So I think it's to be in a position where you can obviously break information when you can, but also to get context from within each of these organizations as soon as possible.
And could you give us a sense of how long it takes or what it takes to build such a Rolodex, right? This type of infrastructure where you do have all this access?
Well, it takes a lot of time. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the relationships that I have in baseball, they start back to when I started covering Major League Baseball in 1992, and you sort of collect them like bricks in a house. And there are times when I'll check myself where I'll say, okay, if some news breaks in this particular type of organization, how many people can I call there? And you hope you have, for me anyway, at least 3 who would be in that chain of command with a big piece of news. And Doug, it's not like you can just call up an organization and say, okay, who are the 3 people I can talk to? It might be somebody you meet in the lunchroom. It might be somebody you meet on the field during batting practice. It might be somebody that you bump into at a restaurant during spring training. So I think it takes years. You can't just simply drop in and have those sort of contacts right away.
And over such a long period of time of your experience, are there anything notable that has changed about that dynamic, about like how you acquire information or who? I mean, what has been different from when you started to today?
One, and there's no doubt about it, is the velocity at which the information moves through social media. When I first started covering sports, I worked at newspapers, and I would have an early deadline, say 7 p.m., and everything that I gathered from the morning until 7 p.m., that would go in that first story. And then I'd have another 3 or 4 hours before my next deadline, 11:30. Well, now, as you know, with Twitter, you're effectively on deadline 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. So you want to get the information as quickly as possible. And sometimes it comes down to literally seconds, where I remember, for example, when Albert Pujols agreed to terms with the Angels, Dan Lozano, who was his agent, sent out a text to a group of reporters that he clearly had been talking with. He said, look, I'm sending this to you all at once. And one reporter tweeted out faster than everybody else did. And so he got credit for breaking the Albert Pujols signing.
I'm curious what you kind of repeat to yourself to center yourself, right? To keep consistent with the values that you establish in your reporting. Do you have like a mantra, a one-liner, or a mentor that said something that sort of echoed in your mind?
I think that number one is you tell the truth. It sounds really simple, but I feel like at times, in sort of the way the industry is going, there's a lot of quid pro quo, and I'm talking about the media industry, not just in baseball. There's a ton of quid pro quo, and there are times, like as someone who knows the backstories and some of this information, that there's some trade-off there where you'll see reports that clearly don't have all the truth. And so my search on a daily basis is to get to the truth of what's happening. And it's part of the reason why, as I cultivate sources, I really aim for that. Like, I get it that some people can't speak on the record. I get it that that they potentially could be spinning me a little bit, but I want to know as close as I possibly can to getting the truth. Like last year, I did a long piece about Freddie Freeman's negotiations with the Atlanta Braves and subsequently the Dodgers. And Freddie's agent, Casey Close, clearly was not happy with what I wrote. And I, just texted him a couple times, essentially, look, I've reached out to you like 6 or 7 times. I'd like to hear what you have to say, because I feel like that it's important to get all sides. And then I have to, whatever I write, whatever I report, has to be as close to the truth as possible. In my opinion, Casey messed up those negotiations by the way he handled the talks with the Atlanta Braves at the 24th hour.
Buster, one word that just keeps echoing as you speak is equilibrium, the sort of the balance you're seeking. So what is that? How would you summarize that sort of balance that you have to seek?
There's a hard line for me. I can't be friends with players. I can have a good professional relationship, but I don't go to dinner with players. I'm not taking tickets from players. I'm not taking tickets from organizations. Me as a reporter, I've never taken money from an organization that I covered. And I feel like that those lines absolutely need to be hard. Sorry about how you were injured in that game last night. What can you tell me about the nature of your injury? So it's absolutely clear, where I stand in terms of developing information versus me doing them a favor with my reporting.
We continue with Buster Olney and get to the bottom of how you trust the information that is reported. And we are joined by the Athletic's Britt Ghiroli. Next on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health, and our discussion with Buster Olney. One thing you mentioned that, a word that speaks to me is agendas, right? All these agendas are around you that want to leverage your echo, your voice, right? So how do you deal with agendas versus sort of navigating that through trust, like getting on the same side of the coin?
Yeah, and Doug, you have to be aware of that, right? That you have to be aware of how a report that you put out there might affect, a player, an agent in doing their job, and have to, and a team official knowing that if they're involved in trade talks, how a report might impact what they're doing. Again, the Northern Light or the North Star for me will always be trying to find the truth and then cost be damned, right? If you write something, if you report something you feel like is the truth and you get an agent mad at you, you get a player mad at you, well, that's just the way it goes, right? Casey Close, he hasn't called me back because the story that I wrote about the Freddie Freeman negotiations was not flattering. I can remember 4 or 5 years ago doing a report on a guy who's in the midst of free agency about an offer that he got, which was far below market value. And the agent called me up and screamed at me because it was inconvenient for him at the moment that report came out. And I was like, are you telling me it's not true? If you're telling me that it's not true and you want to say that on the record, that's one thing. If you're telling me it's inconvenient for you, tough. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, and one word you always hear throughout history is the word leaks, right? Leaking, things along those lines. Now, I remember when I was playing with the Phillies, the last 3 days of the season, we were in Florida, and it got out there that Terry Francona was going to get fired. And he had to manage the last 3 days knowing that. And so to get ahead of it with the players, they left a memo in our chair saying Francona to be fired at the end of the season. So it was horrible. And I think our pitching coach was Galen Cisco, and he just quit. He's like, I can't be here. So I understand, I always think of leaks in various contexts. But what do you think is most misunderstood about that word? You hear it a lot of different ways, but there's also some misunderstanding about what leaks are, what they mean, and how do you actually handle them?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I'll get some feedback from fans on social media, and they'll say, well, put a name to that person who leaked that story. You and I both know, Doug, that there are some people, if they put their name to a quote about a news situation within an organization, they get fired in 0.2 seconds. They're not in a position, and let's face it, unless you're the owner of a team, most of the time you're not in a position where you're going to want to be quoted on the record. And I'd say the other thing too about leaks that people don't understand is, in a lot of cases, there are people in the game, they want the truth to be told. They want accurate reporting. So there will be situations where I'll call someone and say, look, I know you can't talk by name on the record about this, but tell me what the situation is. There are a lot of folks in the game who want that information out there without their name attached to it. But the reason why is because they don't want inaccurate reporting.
Well, Buster Olney, I really want to thank you for taking so much time to shed light on your industry, and you've been a stalwart in this game, a mentor. I just want to thank you, and I know you're busy working on spring training, and so I'll see you soon on the road.
Thanks, Doug.
Coming up, more with Britt Ghiroli and the unique challenges women face as insiders. We'll be right back on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Joining us in class, we have Britt Ghiroli, a longtime senior writer, MLB, for The Athletic. She does national work and also comes from a background at the Washington Nationals and many teams doing beat writing and reporting as well. So great experience, and welcome, Britt, to Classes in Session.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Very happy to be here.
This month, we're talking about the insider culture around sports. And it's become more and more fascinating as we learn how our sources are acquiring information and, the whole process of even being inside these inner circles. And I guess I want to start with you around just the pure definition. When you hear the term insider, what do you think of?
I think of someone, Doug, who breaks a lot of news, someone who has a lot of transactions, is able to kind of be at the forefront of, not just like these investigative type stories, but trades, roster moves, injuries, things like that. And I think, it's kind of the elite of the elite when it comes to sports writing.
So I want to go back to the sense of mentorship and examples in the industry that were set for you that kind of keep you centered and grounded. I mean, how do you manage that where you have such a frenzy?
Usually I call Ken Rosenthal, who I consider the best reporter in baseball and someone I'm blessed to work with at The Athletic. If I'm overwhelmed because he's been doing this for so long, and he'll be like, you can't get everything, focus on this thing or that thing. He does a really great job of really kind of staying focused and realizing that you're not going to be able to break everything at every, moment in time. You're never going to have this 100% average, right? Guys in baseball don't have 100% average. I think you're always looking to bat 300 because at the end of the day, that's pretty damn good, right, Doug?
I'll take it for sure. I want to ask you just about the balance that's required, right? The equilibrium you're trying to seek, whether it's life and work, of course, in general, we all fight it, but also within the industry. So I kind of came up with these categories. And the first one I categorize as like friendships, like this relationship-driven world to give you the access, but you're balancing that with reporting and the honest reporting of without, pride or prejudice, so to speak. So I want to start with that balance. Like, what are the challenges around that relationship?
That's an incredible challenge. And for me, I find it more challenging for front offices than I do players and scouts and coaches and managers. I think on that granular level, they understand that you're friendly, you can have a good relationship. But still, at the end of the day, if they strike out 4 times or make a huge error, you have to write about it, right? I think those guys understand. I think in the front office world, it's a lot tougher because I've said this before, they have no reason to help me. Like, this is kind of the game within the game that people don't realize, is there is a lot of favors being done for people, right? So there's kind of that slippery slope between friendships, relationships, and professional working relationships. And I think that's even tougher because I'm female. Lots of times in my career, I've had to navigate the be nice, but not too nice, because you don't want to give people the wrong idea, especially when I was younger. I mean, I got my first beat at 21 years old. So it was, I wasn't married, I was single, I didn't have any children. So you really wanted to kind of navigate that. And it was very difficult because if I saw a male reporter at a bar with a GM, I would assume nothing was going on. But it wasn't necessarily always the case if you were to see a 21-year-old reporter at a bar with a GM, right? So there's kind of these layers to these relationships. Well, she has these contacts. Well, she's not flirting with this guy. She's doing the same thing I'm doing, which is building a relationship with them. I still think we need to come a ways in that, not just in the clubhouses, but in other reporters' minds, because for so long, I think there was so much competition that male reporters would kind of find ways to say, well, she can't possibly have these sources. There has to be a reason.
And within that, one of the questions I have relates to leaks, right? So I guess broadly, what don't we understand about leaks in that context or just in general as part of what you do as a reporter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I explained this to my husband, I feel like, a lot, but leaks are often very targeted, and leaks are often something that somebody says to sway the popular opinion, right? I think we can kind of look at Adam Schefter in the NFL and the way he kind of initially categorized the Deshaun Watson allegations and what happened there as an example of We know he was friends with Deshaun Watson's agent. We know that kind of where this came from directly was his agent. And instead of getting other parties involved, he just tweets out exactly what his agent told him to tweet. So I think that there's like a slippery slope in insider culture where people want to be first and people want to preserve these relationships with an agent or a GM or a player. But you also have to be aware of the fact that, the media is often something that, we are being played a lot, right? If someone leaks something to you, that's great. But you can't run with it. You need somebody else to say that's right. If you go by what one person says, then you're very often not telling the whole story and you're opening yourself up to a bigger chance of being wrong. One of the worst things you can do as an insider, as someone who builds up your trust, is be wrong. It's the very nature of, this kind of insider sourced culture, but you still have to kind of do your due diligence on things. You have to be willing to not be first, to be second or third, but to know that you're right.
Britt, I really thank you for your unique insights and your great work. And, it's like, an honor to be part of the industry with you as you set the bar and the tone about the ethics and etiquette around insider culture. So continued success.
Well, thank you, Doug. Thank you very much for having me.
The insider culture in sports is a subculture of what we all experience in larger society. Speed is a huge driver of how we expect our information to be delivered, from our email responses to our call with our pediatrician. Insiders have to live on the razor's edge of a high-velocity tornado of data acquired from years of building trust and access, while competing with a heavily leveraged old guard that often gets to take the first shot. Truth must guide these reporters, but so does trust. Trust in what is being told, trust in the sources that can corroborate the story, trust in job security that allows you to be second and right versus first and wrong. And it will be filtered by perception. Women in the industry have become a greater presence, but are still battling misperceptions about their talent and why they outshine others around them. In a world where everyone can be a reporter with a social media account, the fog is thick. The pressure to break the story is great, yet having a beacon of truth, an ethical North Star, cuts through the fog, allowing not only for their work to be seen, but to be true. I'm Doug Glanville. See you next time.